Hey folks, welcome back to the podcast, the Evil Dungeon Master Universe podcast. I am your host, Evil Dungeon Master Vince, and hopefully you're having a great Wednesday. We're middle of the week, we're almost through the week, and today is going to be some more gaming goodness. Go to theevildm.com for everything I'm doing, as well as you can support this podcast by clicking on join either on Spotify or YouTube to support this channel. 99 cents a month. Get access to a bunch of things you'll see. Anyway, today I wanted to look at AD&D's Falling Rules. And I'm not talking about from the original core book or Dragon magazine. I'm talking about from the Dungeoneer Survival Guide. Something that generally hasn't really been cracked open a lot in my games, or even used for that matter. I have one copy of it. I've always had one copy of this book, and it's probably one of the better spines out of all the books I've ever used for AD&D. I don't think it's ever had a cracked spine on it. Like some of you've seen my other books in the past videos on YouTube. Some of them were the bindings falling off, and some of them were cracked or destroyed. This one is a perfect binding. A lot of the orange spines are newer 1.5, as I call AD&D books, don't have much of a crack in the spine because I didn't like when they started changing the rules and adding all these little weird things into the game I considered weird. Doesn't mean it's weird to you, so keep that in mind. Something we discussed on the Roll for Initiative podcast in the past was falling damage and how falling damage worked. And a lot of people argued that when you fall, because it was misinterpreted, when you fall, it's 1d6 damage for every 10 feet you fall, which that is the truth. It is 1d6 damage for every 10 feet you fall. But what the rules don't really go over is cumulative damage. So if you fall for 10 feet, you get 1d6 damage for the first 10 feet. And then it's 2d6 for 10 feet. Okay. Then it's 3d6 for the next 10 feet, which means on a 30-foot fall, it inflicts 6d6 damage to the character. Yeah, you heard me. It is 6d6 because you add each 10 feet together and get the total of how many feet. So if a character falls 40 feet, you're looking at 10d6 points of damage for the character. Now, the rules say the maximum amount of damage your character can sustain by falling is 20d6, regardless of the height that the character falls. I guess it's assuming at that point that if a character's falling that much, he's probably going to be dead anyway. And falling that distance and getting 20d6 points of damage is probably going to give you a system shock roll. At least in my game it will, because that's going to be a lot of damage you're sustaining at one point. The maximum amount of damage a character can sustain by falling over a waterfall is 10d6, regardless of how big the waterfall is, apparently, according to the rules. Now, there are various ways that the book even goes into for stopping a fall. If a character falls for any reason, and this is page 19 and 20 of the Dungeoneer Survival Guide, if you want to look this up while I'm reading this to you. If a character falls for any reason and is next to a wall or any other climbing surface, he can attempt to slow his fall by catching onto the surface. Such an attempt can only be made in the first 50 feet of the fall, since after that, the character's momentum is too great to allow him to catch anything. Interesting. A character can attempt to grab a nearby surface by rolling a d100 and getting a result that is less than or equal to half of the character's climb rating, or the thief's climb walls ability. If the climbing surface is non-slippery, non-slippery, only if the character, okay, the way they wrote this, if this climb surface is non-slippery only. A slippery climbing surface can be caught on by a number of equal or less than a fourth of the character's climb rating. So if it's slippery, it's going to be a fourth. If it's non-slippery, maybe has little places to grab onto, you get half of that number. So what they're talking about in a climb rating is when they started adding on more things to 1E, they started adding non-weapon proficiencies along with weapon proficiencies. And one of the non-weapon proficiencies was a climb rating or climbing, which you would have to roll for. And I didn't ever incorporate these things into games because I didn't really care for non-weapon proficiencies in my game. And that was me. That was my decision. I didn't want to do that. Not a lot of people I know 1E play with those non-weapon proficiencies. Some people don't even play with weapon proficiencies, as far as I know. I add them in because I think it's important that you have a weapon proficiency for your character. So if you're like me and don't use the climb rating or the climb ability like that, unless you have Thief's climb ability, I would just generally use it off of dexterity. Whatever the dexterity is, half that number, and if you get below that, then you have the ability to climb onto the wall or clutch onto the wall. A fourth of it, fourth it. Yeah, very low numbers, but it's similar exactly to the climb rating if you look at it. So just a piece of advice there. That's what I've always done. Give you a percent chance to catch the wall based on your dexterity. Now, they also have some rules for landing. So there's rough landing, there's landing into spikes, there's landing into soft areas, very soft areas landing into water. Rough landing deposits the character in an unfortunate situation of like broken rocks or debris or slanted surface that spends the character ricocheting off to the side. Landings on this rough surface inflict double the normal amount of damage from the fall. So interesting that it says double the normal amount of damage. So they said the maximum amount of damage for any fall can inflict is 20d6. Now, does that contradict that maximum amount of damage? Because now it'd be 40d6 if it's a slanted uh, type of rough with rocks and stuff like that at the bottom. That's why it's called adjudications. That's why DMs have the adjudication ability here. So they could decide what they want to do with this. Now, spikes. We've all done spikes, pit traps, spike traps, things like that. You can add damage onto it based on how many spikes are actually in the pit. Generally, when they say 1d6 for pitfalls, it's because there's usually 1 to 6 little spikes down there. And when someone falls, they'll fall into one of the 6 spikes or some of the 6 spikes. That's why you do 1d6 damage. Now, when they say 3d6, that means it's it's grouped densely, so your character is going to hit a lot of them. So you would roll 3d6 to see how many of the spikes would hit the person for the damage. Soft landings, which include sand, mud, pine branches, or flesh, a character is fortunate enough to make a soft landing. It only takes half damage. Oh, that's great. Very soft landings generally result for some sort of prepared cushion or like feathers or straws or something that the character can land on nicely. A character doing this would have to make a saving throw versus paralyzation. If successful, they would take no damage at all. If unsuccessful, they take half the amount of damage. All right. Water landings can be virtually painless if the character lands correctly, but can be every bit as damaging as the fall into hard stone if the character does a belly flop or lands on his back. Imagine that, doing a belly flop. When a character falls, he can attempt to make a dexterity check. There's our dexterity check. If he suspects or knows that he will be landing in the water. If the check is successful, the character takes 1d6 points of damage for every 100 feet of the fall, rounded up. For example, a character is falling 250 feet into the water, but has made a successful dexterity check. He only suffers 3d6 points of damage. This indicates that the character has positioned himself to enter the water cleanly, either head or feet first. Oh my god, feet first would hurt. If the check is unsuccessful, however, the character sustains normal damage from the fall. So there you go. And dexterity checks are generally, and they don't really go over how these checks work. So dexterity check can be 3d6, it could be 1d20, 4d6. I always use, when I did attribute checks like that, I would do 3d6 as the base, and depending on how hard it was, if it was more difficult, I'd make it 4d6. If it was a little easier, I would make it 3d6 -1 or something like that, or -2. I would add little modifiers onto it. But if it was harder, I had a d6 die itself, just because of the task itself is harder to do. And finally, we go over sliding down slopes. Because generally, sliding down slopes, you probably won't take damage at all. But there is a chance that you could lose your balance, or the momentum is way too fast that you can't stop. A character sliding down a sloped surface does not receive as much damage as someone falling through an open space. On the sloping surface, however, a character suffering abrasions all the way down. Interesting. Unless the slope is very slippery, such as a smooth, wet rock or ice. A character sliding down a sloped surface suffers no damage for the first 20 feet, but suffers 1d6 damage for each 10 feet of the slide thereafter. In addition, the damage caused by landing is 1d6 for each 40 feet of the slide. If the slope is smooth and relatively slippery, the character sustains no damage while sliding, but takes double the normal damage upon landing. So it kind of has the same rules as falling, where you take 1d6 points of damage for every 10 feet, and I'm sure that's cumulative because it's the same thing as momentum as falling. And then on top of that, depending on how big the slide was, you take another probably cumulative points of damage for each 40 feet of the slide. You could probably adjudicate that any way you want as a GM, or a DM, excuse me, because it's very open to interpretation here. It doesn't actually say it like the falling expanded rules say it. So you can technically just be like, yeah, 1d6. So 30 feet, 3d6. 60 feet, 66. You get an extra d6 when you land because of the 40 feet of the slide. Done. It's really open to interpretation, and that's why I like a lot of AD&D 1E. It leaves, while the rules don't exactly tell you everything, it tells you enough to play the game and the story so that you as the DM can focus more on how to do things and not have to worry about it and just adjudicate it. As long as people are having fun, nobody's going to matter about it. No one's going to care. And people that are being that stickler for rules, well, you just wag your finger in their face and be like, now, I'm the DM. Let's talk about this later. That's probably the best way to handle that. But those are the rules for falling. You can find them in the Dungeoneer Survival Guide, page 19 and 20. It has some more interesting rules in here, which I'm going to probably go over in the future on YouTube because as I'm rereading this book, because I was looking for something to read, I'm finding all these little tidbits that I've never really noticed when I was playing AD&D in the past. And we really didn't go over this book that much in Roll for Initiative because none of us really used this book and none of us even cared for the book. And it's unfortunate because we could have actually done a bunch of episodes on this. And that's it. And no one ever requested us to even look at this book, which is kind of odd. In 12 years of that show, no one's asked for it. Maybe they did, and I didn't get the email. Maybe Matt got the email, and it was just like, bah. I don't know. But anyway, I'm going to head out. Tell me what you think in the comments. Like the podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel or follow the channel. And keep it original, keep it old school. Good night. God bless. Don't forget there is all gaming on this channel, and there is no clickbait and no drama. Good night.